just wanted to share some of the outcomes and the findings from our conversations and all of the thoughts and ideas that you've shared with us around this question of what we want the working group engagement to look like in the future, how we can more effectively engage with communities. Thanks for taking part in this fun visioning exercise that we took on yesterday, looking at imagining that it's 2042 and we're looking into the future, at looking back from the future at this moment and what we catalyzed, what we put into action at this summit today that's going to have a lasting effect in the conservation of the species. And so thanks to the incredibly creative Center for Public Lands team who spent a little bit of time last night after a long evening writing up their stories that we've published for you now in the first edition, but it's future fourth, looking back, who knows. Anyhow, the edition from 2042 of the Gunnison Sage Grouse Quinquennial, celebrating 5 years, right? So I hope you'll take a few minutes to look through it and enjoy some of the headlines there that you all came up with in your group discussions yesterday, at the end of the day yesterday, and then the more detailed stories that were put into place. If you want to take home copy to read at your leisure, there are some on the table outside as well. But here are a few of the headlines that stood out that we gathered from your group and your discussions. Gunnison sage grouse delisted following 2 decades of concerted conservation efforts from local working groups. Gunnison community holding hands for 40 years. Success brought to the recovery of the Gunnison sage grouse through determined collaboration. Community rallied together to delist Gunnison sage grouse. Gunnison sage grouse numbers have risen substantially since 2022, despite challenges. What are those challenges? Some of these headlines point to those. Public interest waning, perhaps. Public interest renewed, widespread support for Gunnison sage grouse conservation measures. Or perhaps this one, bureaucracy grinds on. Sage grouse somehow still survives. Maybe that's one of the challenges that we are particularly facing here. I saw in the headlines a lot of hope for interventions as well. Captive rearing facility finally succeeds in raising 2,000 birds for satellite population. Or put another way, pinto bean farmer provides foundation for sage grouse recovery through on-site captive breeding. Some of you had some fun wordplay in your headlines. Genetic gerrymandering galvanizes Gunnison grouse. Or carcass corrals curtail corvids. Got that one there? And then this one I thought was a nice summation in the end. The bird still flies. How Gunnison, Colorado became a global leader on climate change and avian conservation. I liked this one, though, that came in from Clayton Brown, off the charts here. Gunnison sage grouse male count exceeds 5,000. Species removed from threatened and endangered list. Hunting season reinstated. So in these headlines, I definitely see that drift towards pointing or underscoring the importance of these community conversations like we're having today, not only with this community of researchers and practitioners and learners, but also our broader communities of stakeholders and others who are doing this work in so many different capacities. And I see that coming out in these stories and the conversations and the other things that you shared in your discussion groups and in this survey as well. This deep recognition of the importance that this community will be, but also the excitement for new techniques, the excitement to recognize the combination strategy that, conservation and the community-led efforts may not be enough single-handedly, or they may be the key to mobilizing support for some of these larger interventions that may also be crucial. I also see in these a definition of success, right? When we ask what it looks like in 2042, how are we defining the success of the efforts that we're undertaking? There are definitely pointing to numbers, right? 5,000 birds, 2,000 birds, whatever that is, could be one metric of success. But I also see in the headlines and here in your stories a measure of success that has more to do with the people, that has something key to do with the community and how the bird is bringing people together in this conservation effort that maybe goes to more dealing with climate change and some of these other big issues as well. So we also had a little bit of homework. Thank you to the 22 people. There are a lot of people out there who did not take this survey. Not too late to do your homework. Maybe seeing some of other people's thoughts will inspire you to do so. But I think, again, our goal here was to start to gather some metrics, some ways that we can go when you ask for funding. How can we leverage that funding? How can we show agencies what the community is in support of? How are we going to make a case for writing grants or bringing people together? How do we know where to put our effort? So our intent was to try to gather some of those ideas in the survey and really start to think about them in a systematic way. So do take a moment if you still feel up to it, or if something comes to you later down the road, feel free to share your responses there. So here's what we saw in ranking the terms of your priorities, right? What's the most important thing for organizing and activating our local working groups? Hands down, heads up, hands down, funding a coordinator was the highest response. 11 out of the 22 respondents ranked that as their highest priority, and another 11 ranked it as high as the highest in their ranking system there. Looking at the other things that came to the top, recruiting relevant and diverse representatives to those working groups. So I think, in a combination, most people see as the highest priority here, getting a strong coordinator in place, but then also bringing in the right people to the table in those working groups. And that seems to rise to the top. The other couple ones that got a highest priority ranking were pooling resources, looking at landscape scale actions, and then really thinking about how the local working groups interact with local government as well. So I'm not a statistician. I'm a social scientist here, so we're not gonna try to make any conclusions out of that. But I think you can definitely see that priority around really thinking about how these groups are constituted being the first priority. Other things that came to the surface, looking at a local, education and information campaign, and then doing more of what we're doing here of thinking about how we're presenting recent science and best practices. A few there fell to the lower priority, but everything certainly got some attention there. In the survey, I also asked you to think about what we could do in the immediate term, in the short term, defining that as immediate being 3 months, short term being 6 months, what might come up in the medium term over the next 2 years, and what our long-term efforts should go towards. And so I read through these, tried to make note of things that came up more frequently in those conversations and tried to highlight a few of those. So I think by and large, the most immediate term response was about securing funding and hiring that coordinator, thinking about that position there. But then in looking a few more months out, really honing in on some priority actions and what the next steps need to be. Implementation certainly rose to the top when it came to medium-term projects and looking what would happen over the next 2 years. Folks really started to think about implementation. And then, as might be expected in this trajectory then, evaluation, monitoring came up a lot more in the long term. But I thought this was particularly interesting, that when we looked at the long term, how frequently, and I think well over half of the responses that were responding to the long term talked about how we educate people broadly, how we share the outcomes of this work, and how we communicate this work. And so, maybe that seems a little counterintuitive that doesn't just come in the long term, but it certainly rose to my attention as something that folks are thinking about as an important thing to happen. That 10 years from now, we will be effectively communicating about the work that the working groups and others are doing. Just to highlight a few other fun things that came up, these were more of the one-offs or two-offs, but I think caught my attention. There was a wonderful suggestion to really flood social media, get the word out there, use that to bring young people into the conversation and really reach our communities. This easy question that's not so easy of asking who is not at the table and spending that time to recruit and engage them. As you look around the room here today, who's not at the table that should be at our summit? Who's not at the table when you make your decisions in whatever capacity you make them? Who should be involved in that conversation? A plea in the short term to reduce administrative burden to help make things move faster. An interest in surveying the public regarding what their understanding of the issues is. We maybe have come over 2 days to some understanding of the issues among ourselves, but what to other people out there who aren't necessarily in this room right now? What are they thinking about, and what's their understanding of the issues at hand? Looking at defining the focus of these working groups, more effort to share science and meet with stakeholders. Medium-term requests for looking at field tours. What can we do to get people out on the landscape? How can we, have more workshops and more engagement? How can we work to implement more formal understandings, memorandums of understandings, in ways that we can really formalize some of these relationships? Seems like a thoughtful 2-year goal. Not so thoughtful to me today, having another summit in 2 years, but we could talk in about a week. I might be up for that conversation again. But I think there is some momentum around this notion of how frequently we come together like this, and are there opportunities to do that on a more regular basis in a way that can move this conversation along at the appropriate speed. And then again, this notion of looking for opportunities for large-scale interventions as it came to the surface as something to look at in the medium term. Fundraising came up in the immediate term and in the long term, so I guess it's the work that we always do all the time. I loved the reminder of let's check in 10 years and make sure that we're on track with the work to decommission roads and make sure that that work has been going as planned. Captive breeding came up again there, and not a huge amount of attention to this, but a couple nods towards legislative interventions and actions that we could take there as well. So I see a lot of opportunities in this list, a lot of work to be done, surely, but hopefully we're leaving this conversation with some excitement and some renewed vigor for doing that. I know from my role currently as the interim dean in the Clark School of Environment and Sustainability, I'm thinking about this in terms of medium term, 2 years. That's a whole list of potential projects for our graduate students, and it was really exciting for me to see so many of our Masters of Science in Ecology students presenting their work today and thinking about the outcomes of that scientific work into some management work that our MEM students are working on. So I'll give one more shameless plug to think about how to engage students in that work, and also how to become students and bring students into your staff and send them to learn those skills. You saw they did a great job presenting today. So great work on that. So I see the work ahead. I think that there's some momentum and excitement for doing that. And I will continue to synthesize and work on bringing these results and posting them and sharing them with you all in a way that you can use them as you move forward in your planning and thinking about strategy coming out of the summit, and as you always do all the time in your work. Along those lines, we will continue to share information about the summit on the Center for Public Lands website, so centerforpubliclands.org. If you click through to events, you'll still be able to find this summit listed as a past event then, but we will continue to post. For example, when our great team from CSU helps us with the recordings and getting those up, so they'll be available for you to share with others. And you can check back for information on these outcomes from the summit will be shared through our website, so look for those there. So just a couple more items of business as we wrap up the day. A reminder that you can do recycle your name tag when you drop those off on your way out the door. There's other information there. If you have other suggestions or thoughts to share with us, we're happy to take those. Don't forget that there are great partners here, an opportunity to buy that t-shirt and support this conservation work that's happening. I think you could get all of your holiday shopping done early this year, right? Just dropping in and really great organizations to support their work. And so I encourage you to continue to visit these tables here on your way out and thank them for being here and their work. And then I have one last round of thanks. Pat did such a great job last night. thanking so many people who have been involved. But I would like to ask our Catalyst group leaders, those who have been organizing the sessions, to please stand and remain awkwardly standing while we give you a huge round of applause for the work that you've done. We'll start with that. And then to further thank you, we have a limited edition Center for Public Lands hat, only in its second printing. But we really want to thank you for the time and effort that you did and creating the momentum to make this conversation happen over a year's time. It truly has been a collaborative planning experience. And I think you can see just their creativity and their innovation in the ways that each of these sessions came together. It was such a vibrant conference because of this strategy, and I'm so grateful to all of you for your time. And this is just the smallest token of appreciation for your time and what you've given to this community and to the Gunnison sage grouse as well. Along those lines, this seriously would not be happening today in this space were it not for an incredible team from both CSU and Western putting together our IT. Thank you so much. We have students on the cameras from our film program. Thank you for being here and standing up and filming for us. It really takes such a great group. We had our kitchen staff making food for us, getting all of this food to us on time and having great meals. And let's thank them too. They're loud, they can hear us. I'm not gonna thank them for cooking bacon this morning and then feeding us muffins though. That was just mean. But they did a great job, and I'm really grateful to this great team at Western that supports us with our facilities and making this space available to us. Look at this incredible, they disappeared. This incredible group of sponsors that we've had that have helped with everything from meals to name tags to funding for speakers to travel and all of these great things that have made this possible. Truly, I'm beyond words for the generosity from so many sponsors. And let's thank them one more time for their time and money. And I'll extend one particular thanks to an incredible team of organizers who put this whole summit together. I remember it was my first meeting that I had in person after several weeks of isolation from the pandemic. And we gathered together tentatively in mass, like, is it okay to be together? And we sat over here in Kelly Hall with Jess Young and Sally Thode and Pat McGee and Maddie Rain. And we had this conversation about what needed to be done for the Gunnison sage grouse. And we were looking ahead to this summit, which we didn't know would still be a couple years out at the time. But we were also really thinking broadly about the bird and about what needed to be done in our communities at this time to really mobilize action and make things happen. And so I'm just tremendously grateful to be at this point and see this first step, this first culmination of those efforts. But know, and I want you all to know that we are committed to continuing to have this conversation, broadly speaking, not just around the summit. So let's extend some thanks to Sally Thode, Jess Young, Pat McGee, Kathy Griffin, Whit Blair, Ann Timmerman, Center for Public Lands team, Lily Richards, Addie Mandeville, Isabel English, Toby Nickel, Maddie Rain. Thank you all for so much work.